This is Catherine Nastrom interviewing Narvie J. Harris for the Southern Oral History Program and the Georgia Government Documentation Project. Today is June 11th, 1992. I'd like to begin with a little bit of biographical information. If you would start with where you were born and when and where you were raised.
I was born to James and Anna Jordan in Riceville, Georgia, Johnson County. I was their second born. I had a brother older. At a very, very young age, from listening to my mother, I think a baby in arms, they moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where I have resided all of my life. I attended Atlanta Public Schools, Clark University, before they changed the name to Clark College. Among the first trained people for gene supervision work, which took place 1943-44. Prior to that time, I started teaching in 1939 in Decatur County, Bainbridge, Georgia, being the county seat. My major in college was home economics with a minor in education. I was there for 2 years, 41, 42, Henry County, 42, 43, Calhoun County, Edison, Georgia. In each of the places I taught home ec, and until my last year, a little elementary, over the lunchroom with nothing to work with. Generally, that's it. While at Atlanta University, we were interviewed by several superintendents, and upon the recommendation of Mr. Robert L. Cousin, who at that time was State Director of Negro Education, recommended that I go to DeKalb, where I had done my student teaching for 9 weeks, because DeKalb was among the counties that was paying a supplement that some of the others where I was interviewed and accepted did not. I went to DeKalb August 15th, 1944, where I remained June 30th, 1983.
So that's 39 years in the
39,
DeKalb school system,
right.
And a little over 40 years altogether.
42
in teaching.
education direct.
What was the name of the high school you attended?
Booker T. Washington High School, where Mr. C.L. Harper was our first principal, who the school opened September 7th, 1924, and was the only high school for blacks in the city of Atlanta, public at that time.
And what years were you at Clark?
I was at Clark. I was out 1 year due to finances. I finished high school in 34. Being out a semester here and a semester there, I graduated from Clark in 1939.
I'd like to get down a little bit more information about your career, but I want to follow up on one thing that you mentioned when we spoke last November, which is you said that your father had been involved in the integration of the police force in Atlanta, is that right?
Right.
Okay, I know a bit about that, and I believe it took place in 1948.
I don't remember the year.
That's to the best of my recollection. And I wondered if you had any memories or stories from what he had told you about how that had happened, or just in general what your understanding of the situation was.
I really don't remember us ever having a conversation. My father was a businessman, and most of our attention parentally was from my mother. He was involved in whatever was going on in the city of Atlanta, in church and civic organization, and as a businessman, the only black to have a department store, which started out as a tailor shop when we moved from Riceville, Georgia to Atlanta. So he spent a lot of time with the Y and Mount Olive Baptist Church, where he sang in the choir, and my mother, and also where he played the trumpet. Very active member of the Elks Lodge, and he played in the marching band. I can just remember people talking about when the black policemen, and one or two of them, one I was talking to him the other day, Ernest Line, I remember that they were housed at the Butler Street YMCA, where many things happened. That used to be, if it wasn't in a church, it was at the Y. I remember that. And how that they could not go into the police department itself, nor could they arrest anyone white. And I remember when they came on board, how proud all of us were as black citizens in the city, too busy to hate, a quote of Ivan Allen Jr., our mayor, at one time. I can remember the pride, and I still have. As a matter of fact, the other day I was looking through something, that was a picture that you see all the time, and they are standing in front of the Butler Street YMCA. But as a civic person, my father, you would say, was a race man, not a racist, a race man, who was for, and I'm in the process of doing his life, he was stressing to us as children, and we're doing this to my grandbaby, education is the answer. You don't get anywhere if you are illiterate. I stressed it all of my years in the cab with boys and girls. Get you an education. It's one thing people cannot take from you. When you're ignorant, and we know this, people can put their foot on your neck. And as Butch Washington said, I'll let no man hate me, put me so low that I, hate him. And my father was, even I found among his things, meetings that he attended for desegregation of schools in Atlanta, when blacks were fighting for equal salaries, which we did not have. For the same work, you got paid different amounts of money. And as a part of the few collection I have of his, I'm including some of that too. He mentioned he went to the Bahamas, and how he saw black men and women working computers way back, and working for AT&T, and they wasn't doing it in Atlanta. And he mentioned that Clarence Darrow said that blacks will educate their boys and girls, their sons and daughters. They won't have a job for them. We're saying blue jeans. My father said in the same article I read, why don't we open an overall factory? Why don't we own a broom factory? Give our boys and girls. And he boasted of one thing: my father never worked for anybody.
But himself.
Himself.
Mm-hmm.
He started off in Riceville, Georgia. In the article said he cleaned a hat for a white minister for 25 cents. When my late husband went to tell him we were getting married, didn't ask permission because I was past 21, he said this to him, among the things he had proud of: my daughter has never lived in a rented house. That didn't mean a thing to me growing up. I don't know what people lived in, but he had pride in the fact of home ownership, doing for yourself, even pulling yourself up by your bootstraps when you have no boots. And he did. And I look at young people now who can get minority loans and they get all this, and I think of the black business leaders in Atlanta. And I told you I started working down there in his place at age 11, and I worked at sophomore college. And we now, when I look at Auburn Avenue, it bothers me. It's destitute. It's nothing. They're trying to revive it. Our church on Sunday rededicated our shopping center, and they got a loan, and it's been redone. But when Reverend Borders did that, to make places for people to work, when we put up the housing project, we put up the senior citizens tower, we didn't have all these opportunities. And it was even worse with my father, and even generations before him, to have your own business. And that's why I felt a lot of pride when I was asked if I would usher last Friday for this research center, because I immediately said, I know where I'm going to put my father's things. Mm-hmm. And I've just about made up my mind for those that I have done for Wheat Street Baptist Church.
I'd be interested too, since you've mentioned your father's influence on you. He was a businessman. What, was your mother a working woman?
My mother was a housewife. My mother birthed 7 children. The one honored today was her baby, born December 4th, 1933. 9.5 pounds, as big as this room. I always introduce him as my little baby brother, and everybody laughs when they see him. She really had no time to do outside work.
Was she involved in Civic organizations?
Very little. My mother worked in the church. She was a community person.
Mhm.
She took care of the sick, other people's children. We lived on Lena Street, which is middle of the block from Ashford Street School. So anybody that went to Ashford Street School, that went up and down Lena Street from 1929, we moved there until she passed in 74, knew Miss Jordan. She always had a smile. We had a garden. We had flowers. She canned. My grandfather used to send us a hog every winter. She cut it up, and I used to marvel how she could make sauce meat and all the kind of things. Even after her passing, I used to take flowers from my flower garden to her grave. She was more known as a community lady. An example, lady was substituting at Tuck Elementary one day, and she said, "I live on Lena Street." I said, "You know my mother, Miss Jordan?" She said, "No, I don't believe I know her." I said, "You know my mother, Mrs. Jordan." I said, "She lived in a real big house, had a big house, big porch." And I said, "She's always on the front." So after I kept talking about it, she said, "You talking about the friendly lady with the little girl?" I said, "The little girl is my daughter." I went back to work at age when she was 5 weeks old. And she called her the friendly lady. She said, "Oh, the lady that likes to talk, that's my mother." She said, "Oh, you have to keep walking." Now you do, because she talks. And lady told me she could tell time at school to talk there at Ashby School by Miss Jordan. When she was getting ready to go to market, by the time she left home, I'm going to say at 9, I don't know what time, it may be 10, 11 before she got there, because she's talking to everybody. She kept people's children. Those are the kind of things that she did. She was a part of PTA, of course, because we were children. But so far as out voicing opinions like my father and like I do, no. But they all knew Miss Jordan. When mothers didn't hear from boys in the Army, they came to see Miss Jordan.
She would have that information?
They would just come to see her because they liked her. I
Oh,
thought
I
a guy
see.
was dating me for years, and he told me he really was coming to see my mother. Very prolific vocabulary. She read. Only took one vacation, and she was to be gone 2 weeks, and she came back in a week because she said she thought we were lonely, but she didn't know we were having a good time. My aunt, who was always younger than my mother in action, and my granddad, my father's dad, we were having a good time. And she come ringing the doorbell and went, we were crestfallen. Because if she was there, we could not go to the park every day. And with my aunt and my granddad, we could go to the park every day, and I didn't have to wash dishes. We just had a good time, but she said we missed her.
Now, I know that currently your church affiliation is the Wheat Street Baptist Church. Is that right?
That's correct.
The church, was that the church of your parents too?
No.
Or you mentioned Mount Zion
No.
Baptist? Is that
My
right?
mother and father were a member of Mount Olive Baptist
Olive.
Church, where the late Reverend James Nabrit was pastor.
What's the last name, James?
Nabrit. He had a son that taught at Atlanta University. Matter of fact, at one time he was dean of the graduate school, and the Nabrit family is one of a lot of
How's that last name?
Nabrit. James Nabrit.
When did you become involved with Wheat Street Baptist Church?
After marrying, I married in 1945. My husband joined Wheat Street Baptist Church in 47. And it was either the later part of 47 or 48 that I joined. I was baptized at the West Hunter Street Baptist Church, where at that time Reverend Samuel Pettigrew was the sister. That was at the corner of Hunter and Chestnut Street. And that was during my college years and my first year's teaching.
I'd like to move back into the discussion of your career now. And am I right in remembering that your first position in the DeKalb school system was as a Gene Supervisor?
That's correct.
And were you also known as the instructional coordinator for the?
The names changed through the years.
Okay.
That was through the State Department of Education. Gene supervisors were black men and women who served in the South. And of course I told you Jeans came from Miss Anna T. Jeans, a white philanthropist who gave money for the improvement of education for blacks in the South. We were the Jeans, but we named the organization Jeans in her honor. At that time it was not called that. I had a contract each year with the State Department of Education, and with that was a contract that I got $100 a month from the Jeans Foundation, which now is a part of the Southern Education Foundation. So there was just a name change, curriculum directors, instructional coordinators, and other names from the State Department of Education. Because most of our salaries came from the state.
Right, so it was the Jeans Fund was more in the way of a supplement.
It was, so part of our supplement.
Did you work as a Jeans supervisor all the way up until 1983, or when did that aspect of your career end?
83.
83
I
as
started in
well.
44, and I retired in 83.
Was all of your work involved in the instructional aspect, the curriculum aspect as an educator?
I don't quite understand the question.
I'm thinking
You want to know what did I do?
In a minute, we'll be spending some time talking about
Okay.
your work in the PTA, and so now I'm thinking
No, but I
more
mean,
about
you're talking
your-
about what did I do in
in
the
terms
Cobb
of-
County with
right,
teachers.
Right.
I had general supervision of the 17 schools for blacks when I went to the Cobb County, 12 of which were in churches, large halls, and I mentioned that Mount Moriah was the only one really in a building that you would say, that was built for a school. Mount Moriah was in the Druid Hill area, which is still an outstanding area for whites. At that time, I'm sure blacks are there now. I'm not sure, but I'm sure they are. And they supplemented that teacher in Mount Moriah and even made provisions for transportation and sometimes even housing. They also were paid for 12 months before the state started a 12-month program. As a Gene supervisor at the beginning, and my role changed, I believe I saw a copy of the letter in 67, which was years after the Supreme Court decision, was general supervision. Whatever took place in the schools for blacks, I did it. The only report I did not take in was the attendance report, which went to the superintendent's office. I recommended staff. I held in-service meetings. I worked with the community in general. I attended church, home demonstration agent meetings. We worked very close together. We worked very close with the county nurse who served our schools. Whatever came up. But my main role was to enhance instruction in the school system. That was what we were there for, to help teachers to teach better boys and girls. I supplied material. I had in-service meetings every month. Later broke them down to areas like I'd have primary, intermediate, and then high school. We didn't have middle schools as such at that time. Then, as a part of an enrichment program, as I mentioned to you, the 7 cardinal principles of education were being stressed through the National Education Association. I found when I went, of course, no running water, there were no paved streets, no lights in any schools, well, none of the kind of things that you would say would make a school. But this did not daunt me. All I saw is not a problem, I saw a challenge, and we're going to do something about it. And among the things was our children were raising hymns. And through some source, I remember going over to American Seating on Walker Street buying these 25-cent sing-along songbooks to teach them some children's songs. I'm a lover of spirituals. Find some of that done at our church now. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. They had no troubles, little babies. So we started with music, and my other one, when I was at AU, I did 2 investigations instead of a thesis. I did one to meet the requirements for supervision, and I did one to meet the requirements for Master of Education degree. I wrote a proposal, one for a program in health, because I had been there 9 weeks, so I knew all the communities, you know, where they were, the conditions of them. And I didn't ever know where, but I had to do a proposal on doing a health council in X County, which we did. We called together community people, staff people through then Avondale Color Elementary and High School, and one of the teachers, Mr. Everett, was the chairman. So we put down the different needs that we saw. One of the pressing needs that we felt was running water in the schools. So the first project we worked on was this running water. And I told you how through Ma Hudson, Executive Director of Chamber of Commerce of DeKalb, and Mrs. Spillman and Mrs. Lucy Cherry, who was an educational person that worked with schools for black, we pull in for their assistance. Along with that, during the year, when I would have meetings with the PTA council, which I organized in 45, I worked through the parents, because without their help, very little happened, and that's how the home demonstration agent and the nurse. The nurse went in for medical reasons. The home demonstration agent went in for putting screens in your house, covering the well. I went in as a motivator to get more cooperation to get children in school. And all of us together became more or less social workers. We got clothes for children. Whatever we saw needed between the three of us as a team, this is how we improve things. So you can't teach a child if he doesn't come to school. He can't come to school if he doesn't have any shoes. He doesn't have any clothes on his back. We went into homes. I remember one day, and I was astounded that out in the backyard over some rocks was a fire, a big lard can for washing dishes. And to get in the house, I had to step on a rock to get in the house. It was almost bare. There was nothing in there. We went in another at the south end of the county. This again is a team approach. And the first room we went in was a room with nothing but croaker bag, burlap bags. That's where somebody slept. So we go in the next room, and here's a bed with some of these wire springs with a hole in it, and there was more smoke coming out the chimney that was going up. Then we go in the kitchen, and here's this murky, gray, greasy water they call washing dishes. So what she and I did, we found out whose place they were working on. DeKalb used to be known as a dairy in county. You still have Mathis Dairy out there. And we went to this man, and he said he would be happy for them to have a garden. He furnished all the milk that they needed. We went about getting quilts for them to sleep on, a mattress that someone put on top of my car to take to them. So you couldn't separate, education from personal basic needs that people have. So when you say, what did I do? I guess you look back now and think that I also was a social worker.
I was so struck as I was reading through the publications related to Jean's work, but also to the PTA, this theme of connecting the home to the school, to the community, and the church as well.
Those are our objectives. We can no longer use the word church now. The objectives have changed to places of worship. We've gotten all this sexes, the he's and the hers and the was and all, but that is what we did.
In terms of addressing these problems that ran in the direction of health and safety and other, in many things beyond simple schooling, where did you get assistance to deal with these problems? Did you turn to public officials, private organizations, solving them yourselves?
Things we were taught at an AU by Mrs. Helen A. Whiting, who rose from a one-teacher school to the State Department of Education and graduate school at AU. When you go into the county's girls, acquaint yourself with agencies. So when I went to DeKalb County, I just knocked on the doorsteps of the Red Cross, Fire Department, Police Department, Department of Family and Children's Service. I let them know who I was, and I might be calling them. I found out what do you render. Another way we became acquainted, through the schools, we used to raise funds like for the community chest, at that time polio, and me being the liaison person, they had my name. So you were called upon, and you called upon. When I mentioned the quilts that we got were from the Department of Family and Children's Service. When I would go in and see children who needed clothing, or the nurse, or the home demonstration agent, we knew where to go, and they knew us. So it was through working with agencies that we got to cooperation. When I didn't know, like to invite them to the music festival, I read the DeKalb paper, and I still subscribe to it. I pay for it now, I used to get it free. I just contact them. I just sit down and write them a letter, look it up in the phone book, and I'm Narvie Harris, or Narvie Jordan before I married, and I said, we have need of this, we need that, can you come and speak? I had them to come to meetings. Now, to organize the PTA council, I saw a need for some adult education. And I asked each principal to send a representative from his or her school. And through this way, I'd have demonstration, I'd have speakers, we organized, we ended up doing a yearbook for the year with subjects. I taught parliamentary procedure to them. Another one that I almost could have lost them. I never understood, and I still don't understand why you keep 20 cents on a handkerchief at home. We would pay 50 cents transportation for the officers to come. Well, the treasurer from Mount Moriah did not come one day. I remember her name, Mrs. Kelly. And Mrs. Peters from Tucker said, I will keep it. We probably had $2. But the next meeting or two, she got up in the meeting and said we owed her 50 cents. Well, we had paid her for coming, so we want to know why. And I could see there was a little anger there because she kept the money. So I said to somebody over there, make a motion so we can give her 50 cents, because she had enough influence. We wouldn't have a council. So you have to know how to do things that's expedient. And she was happy, you know. But these,
Go ahead.
I was just saying, you want to know how we did it. It's through cooperation of agencies, and we work very close with agencies.
I'm thinking that what you've been describing so far were problems that you identified when you first began work
Yes.
in the mid-1940s. Was there a time when you felt that you'd brought facilities up to a point that you were satisfied with?
I'm never
Was there-
satisfied, even
Was
today.
there significant improvement over time, or was it always an uphill battle?
Well, one improvement was, and it was cooperation between the races for the water. To get down to the school in the community, we had to go down from Ponston and North Clarendon, Cedar Street. To me, it was significant knowing about segregation. Before you could get the water down to where we lived, we had the cooperation of the whites way back in the 40s, and I thought that was significant, and they wanted water too. Basically, all people have the same basic needs. They want to eat, they want to be warm, they get cold. All of us want education for our children, so there was a lot of commonality, even though we did not meet together. When we approached them, they were struggling as well as the blacks. These were not rich whites. That to me was a step forward that I look back now, I thought nothing of it then. They didn't have any paving on that street either. And I look now, I went to a wake of one of our past presidents, PTA. It's Leverett Funeral Home. And I remember whites lived right in that house. I remember that. And I say to them, they were little boys then, I said, I'm just proud of you, and you got this good business that's running. And I said, I can remember I used to look at this house, but I never thought I'd get in it. So we worked together. I think, well, even when I started teaching, and this is where I feel, if politicians would let us alone, I think there would be excellent human relations everywhere. They work by the divide and conquer. Over here they're telling you one thing, and over here they're telling me another. And never do we meet. And once when we meet, we work together. I don't remember the exact year, but the same on Hudson. What I did when we sent invitations out to whatever we had, I invited them. The mayor of Decatur, I didn't know him, and Scott Candler, who was a known commissioner at that time, I invited him. And these, again, names in the paper are names that you hear about. And then I became involved on a lot of committees in the county. Like, for a number of years, I was the black on the Historical Society, and I'm still on it, went to meeting Tuesday. And you get to know these people, you get to know names. And when something comes up, we use the term, and I've said this over and over today, networking. By contacting, I look now and think of Mrs. Frances Pauley. Mrs. Pauley, who's still fighting for poor people, period. She's 90-something years old. We had a chat about a month ago. And I went to her house. I don't know how I happened to go, but I went right there at the corner of Claremont and whatever street is Lecture Avenue or something, where the First Baptist Church sits right now. When I passed, I think that's where Mr. and Mrs. William C. Pauley lived. He taught at Georgia Tech. I think he was an area architect. And I still have the comments. I took one of my investigations for her to read it. And she wrote on there, how wonderful, we hope this can come. And we still have contact with one another. And this is from me and in Carroll County.
I know of Frances Pauley and her work,
Mhm.
and I think she worked through first the Committee on Interracial Cooperation,
Right.
and then into the Georgia Council on Human Relations. And I'm wondering if it was these organizations and other organizations interested in interracial work that you approached.
They weren't then in the early 40s. They weren't. If they were, I was not aware. I don't really remember what Mrs. Pauley was doing. I'll tell you how I started working with Mrs. Richardson, who retired in the legislature last year. For several summers, I directed Head Start for the school system.
And in what years did you do that?
I'd have to look at my record to be exact, because it was several summers. Mrs. Richardson was one of the volunteers, and she served on our DeKalb School Advisory Board. Them serving on the DeKalb Board of Directors of the American Red Cross. And in serving, this is again how you met people from different walks of life. I think it was last year, first this year, I received a letter of Miss Frances Stoops that I found on the board. They honored her for I don't know how many years as a volunteer at the American Red Cross, and asked me to send a letter how I knew her in the early years. And I said, as we passed the YMCA on Tuesday to my grandbaby, I was on the early search committee for the YWCA in DeKalb County, which is located on the Lawrenceville Highway. I don't know if any records were kept, but I was on the committee. And I remember we used to meet at the Avondale White High School gym. I don't even remember the lady in charge. I don't remember names. I didn't keep that good of records on it. But as Gene supervisors, you will find over the state and other southern states, they would know the Gene supervisor if they didn't know anybody else. If it had to deal with black people, they'd refer you. I don't care what it was. I went to we said United Way, we used to call it community chess meetings. I go to some of the Urban League had or something of this sort. So we were really the communicator between agencies and groups and organizations, and sometimes we were that person that they knew that they could call on who could get them into the communities where blacks lived. I know in my case, and if I talk to others, I find the same thing. Some were more active than others, and some, they just did their job. Mm-hmm.
When you were with the DeKalb schools, did the nature of your work change over time, or are the issues that you've just been describing issues that were ongoing throughout your time with the school system? Yes,
they did change. When it was recognized that we could no longer be segregated, and I was looking at the letter today, Dr. Clark, who was then Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, said to me one day in the 60s, he said, no longer can we keep you just working with, the word was used, which was used a lot in colored schools. You can decide at what level you would like to work. Just before you came, I read the letter that I wrote to him. We had 3 small high schools, and why we had to have it was due to location. It would have been riding all day long to have driven from Linwood Park, which is in the Shamley area, to come to the center of the county, Avondale, and from Lithonia to come. So we had 3 very small high schools. Hamilton High, when they built all schools, became a single high school. Linwood Park was elementary and high school, and so was Spruce Street.
Spruce Street?
BRUCE. It used to be the Lithonia. What happened with the schools? Lithonia, colored high and elementary, and the same was Linwood Park, and of course Avondale. And then when they desegregated, we broke up Hamilton High, and it's named for a former principal, and we had Robert Shaw. And this Robert Shaw was named for a Negro man who donated the land to the Board of Education. So the school was named Robert Shaw. It was among the 11 schools we dedicated at one time, one Sunday. And Mr. Cherry spoke by way of video. Dedication was done, and all of us met in our schools and had the dedication of 11 schools at one time. We were growing so fast, Mr. Cherry used to say we needed a new classroom every Monday morning. We be meeting in cloakrooms and cafeterias, wherever we could. The population was growing so fast.
And am I right in thinking that this was really the 1960s when there was
Yes,
such a
yes,
population
that's
boom
right.
in the county?
Population, that's right.
The changes that you've just been talking about here have been in the 1960s, but were they prior to the desegregation of DeKalb schools in '69, or are you talking about developments after that time?
All right, in '67 is when my role changed from totally responsible for the black schools to then working across the board. I was in schools, period. And Mr. Cherry made it clearly known that all supervisors were his right arm into the schools, and we all had the same rights and privileges. At no time can I think of, to amount to anything, was I treated any different, or when I went into the schools. That was previously all white. I went as a professional educator, and I left as one. And I have letters of commendations from many of the schools. Matter of fact, it's 300 and something out there in that book that you can look at of my work and how I handle the situation. During the time in the late 40s, confrontation took place in the county between the superintendent and then Jim Cherry, who came to us first as a supervisor from the State Department of Education. He was later hired as consultant. And it could have really been a problem for me. I remember we were housed upstairs on Atlanta Avenue. And when you go up the steps of a drugstore, on this side was Jim Cherry's office, and on that side was Superintendent Nelson's office, and in the center was the secretary. If I went up the steps and both doors were open, I didn't talk to anybody. I had a conference every Monday morning with the superintendent, and this is how they were kept in touch with our wants, our needs, or my needs or desires. If the superintendent's office door was closed, I had it with Jim Cherry, and vice versa. And I have a letter from Mr. Cousins stating, congratulations, I did not become embroiled in the charges of Mr. Nelson of malfeasance in office. He went to court and he won. But his responsibilities were no more than a figurehead. He'd go around and visit the schools, even Mr. Cherry signed the checks. But I didn't get involved.
I'm not sure I recall what is Mr. Nelson's full name?
Henry
Nelson.
Henry E. Nelson.
And he was the what was his exact position?
Superintendent
Superintendent of schools.
schools.
At the time that Jim Cherry was what?
Employed as consultant to the school system.
And what were the nature of the charges against?
Well, malfeasance, whatever that take. In other words, you're not qualified, you're not doing the job. And the superintendent I started under, Mr. William Rainey, said to me after the election, he said, the new man you're going to get, he's some kind of ugly word. If you can't work with him, he's a damn do-gooder Christian. And it's bad to be a Christian, I find. You know, like Carter say he was Christian. Like, you don't like Christians for some reason. I don't talk about my thing, I try to live it. And if you need a recommendation, I'm just getting there, let me know. Well, I never had a problem with it because I knew what my job was and they knew what theirs was, and I didn't, get into it. It was also during Mr. Nelson's tenure as superintendent. I got a call one day to come in, and I had to meet with the grand jury. First and only time I've had to do that. Seems the grand jury had been around visiting in the schools for black, and they found so many things we did not have. Well, we had invited Mr. Nelson to one of our countywide meetings at Avondale, and among the things that the teachers asked, can we get some construction paper? Can we get some pencils and tablets, etc.? And he said to them that day that if we would raise the money, and this was a thing in the South, you raised money. When I was teaching, we'd get peanuts from the children and then have a carnival and sell them to them. I used to buy the chalk. I wrote on the board. I never was anywhere where they gave me anything. I take that little money I had and I buy it. Okay, we collected, I forgot the exact penny, but among my things I have it. When I took it to Garland Purdue, who was a purchasing agent for the DeKalb County school system, he said to me he didn't have time to buy things for color school for me to go. And he told me 2 places, and I went. And they said, we can't sell to you. We have to sell to the purchasing agent. So I go back. Well, here it is. I'm sitting up here with this money. So I took it and opened an account at First National Bank and banked it in my name and the Board of Education. So when they sent for me, and that was Mr. Purdue, the superintendent, and Mrs. Logan, who's the secretary, and they started applying me with questions. And I told them that's the way it happened, and there was no denial on anybody's part. So they say to me, tomorrow you go get that money out of the bank and you give it to Henry. And Henry, we're going to give you a week to get supplies in the color school. Well, next day or two, I was living at home. I was not married then. He called me to come to the office, and I went, and he'd say what he wanted. And he said, you know, the grand jury gave me a week to get things in the color schools, and I want you to take them. Well, I had during the war years, like 44, my dad had bought me, I paid for the car, a 39 Plymouth. And the street I was living on at that time was not a paved street in Atlanta. That street was paved in 50, the year my daughter was born. I had broken a spring, and at no time in my career, because I was trained differently at home, was I ever insubordinate. But I say to my mother when I left that day, I'll probably be back home, I won't have a job. I'm not taking it. So when I went in his office, he said, you know what I called you for? I want you to take the supplies to the colored schools. I said, Mr. Nelson, I'm a lady. Are you saying I need to go to the warehouse and count out pencils and tablets and sheets of drawing paper? He said, yes. I said, but they told you to do it. And Mr. Purdue has a truck. He said, all right. Well, that was part of his leadership style. He was a very humble, kind person. But it's the way you say things. In a week, they went to schools, and I never took a pencil. I never took a pencil. I never took a book. I was sitting there when they told him what to do, and I didn't, quote and all. I said, but I'm a lady. I had broken a spring in my car, so it was an old car to begin with, and that's Mr. Purdue's job. Somewhere I told, well, Mr. Purdue got them in the schools, and that's how we got our first, supplies and all into the school. Because of my going before the grand jury in DeKalb County, then they would carry it to the schools. So you went through a lot. See what we used to have to do. How we started getting library books. The white principal at Avondale and in Lithonia were kind of assistant over the black principal. Well, a Mr. Burgess, who was a very fine person, I think it was J.E. Burgess, would come down and talk with Mr. Haddon, and in talking, he would talk about the kind of things that they got, and he mentioned, well, they would tell us to raise money. This is when Sarah was or nothing. Most blacks in the DeKalb, when I went there, women were domestic workers, men worked at very menial jobs. In Avondale, they would Scottsdale Mill. In Lithonia, they worked at the grit place. That's why I told y'all most of them had TV. And in Redan. So you didn't have the kind of jobs that, now that has, come to be, because we had no children going to college at that time. We had no college graduates, just poor blacks in a county which was predominantly white. It's not predominantly black because of white flight, same thing we have in Atlanta. But this is why in my work I'm trying to see, golly, dragging the total picture of improving their life, to get some water, to get screens, to have pride, some self-esteem that you are somebody, even though you may not have this. And I used to say to them, being put doesn't mean you have to be dirty. We talked about dressing. We did skits through the Atlanta TV Association that Mrs. Cherry told us, and this is Lucy Cherry, not Superintendent's wife, she's Virginia, that were sent all the way to Hawaii, and we performed those skits. We had a health fair every year, and then the Thankful Baptist Church. And we did skits. At one time, I had the Bloodmobile to come, and my feelings were really hurt. I was the first to go in for them to draw blood. They never told me, but I later asked. When I was 5th grade, I remember having typhoid pneumonia. And late in talking to people, it did something to me. They wouldn't take my blood. So someone in the medical field said, you could have been a carrier. This is 100 years ago, 5th grade, and I'm a grown woman in the 40s. But they didn't tell me, so I'm assuming that's what it was. But here it is, I'm the leader, and I go in, for my teachers to follow the example. I'm one of the leaders, as my pastor said, come on, not go ahead. You follow me. A leader follows, he leads. And it lowered my self-esteem. They never knew that, but I look back now, they never told me, and they should have told me. And it's like now, this AIDS thing, how they're checking people's blood. But as far as I know, I'm not a carrier, but I'll never know because they never told me. We would have, we used it one time. I remember Dr. Vincent came as our Commissioner of Health. We used him as a speaker. We set up classes for my teachers and myself to get training in testing hearing and testing vision. We'd go to the American Red Cross, or they would set it up in the area. The American Red Cross gave me and a principal a scholarship. We went to Tennessee State University, and we attended the National Aquatic School. And then we came back, and I taught standard first aid to my teachers and anybody who would come. So this, again, as I say, it was more or less kind of a total involvement. But after the 60s is when, everybody more or less were working together.
Working together?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So things improved and they changed. We became somebody with an identity, whereas before we were identified as the colored or the black people, which was true in the South, period. It wasn't just DeKalb. But I know more about DeKalb in Atlanta because it's where I lived.
Before we get into the material on the PTA, I want to follow up on one other aspect of this early work you've been describing. You mentioned briefly before the Atlanta Urban League, and I think that many of the issues that you were addressing in the DeKalb schools, the Atlanta Urban League was considering to be a problem too. Lack of running water, overcrowded facilities, and all of that. But I'm wondering if the Urban League's work extended into DeKalb County at all.
No.
So you were working more or less on your...
Because I was, again, the liaison person. It's how I had contact with many agencies. Mm-hmm. Through me, the contact was made. Not necessarily they're coming to us, but through me, contacts were made, and I attended meetings and got my 2 cents in, or that kind of thing.
So
I don't remember them ever coming to the
right.
cab.
From my understanding, they didn't do a whole lot either. I wanted to make sure that,
Mm-hmm.
that it matched your recollection.
Mm-hmm.
So that in this case, developments going on in Atlanta were not necessarily connected to developments going on in DeKalb.
Not necessarily, but they were contacts. Not necessarily where they actually came into the county, promoted a program. The Atlanta TB Association did through Mrs. Cherry. Her job included, I believe, Atlanta, Decatur, DeKalb. May have included Fulton, I don't know. But where they had a person to come in, this is how she and I worked very close together. And with Ms. Spellman, who was executive director of the Atlanta TB Association. That's the one that I know came into the county. The Urban League never did. No, I can't think of any now. As I said, I collected funds
Right.
during the fundraising campaign for the community chest.
Right.
And other, agencies where there were funds like Cancer Society or what have you. But to say coming in direct, when invited, I would invite them in. I'd use agencies, even the state. I used Atlanta University for workshops.
Had faculty
but
members come and give workshops?
Yes, yes. I even had a statewide workshop lunchroom. I showed you the picture. Mrs. Wofford was from the State Department, who came in and did workshops for and with our teachers. They used to have every summer at Druid Hills High School workshops for teachers. And among the times when I would have my conference, I say to Mr. Chair, what about my teachers going to do it here? Of course, you know they couldn't go. And then he appropriated money that Narvie, you can get some of your teachers, and he paid for them to go to AU. They started the new math program, the same kind of thing. He paid for a consultant to come and work with our teachers on new math. For years and years, they had administrators meetings in which we were left out. And of course, I pressed that subject. And he said, well, you go over to AU and talk to Dr. Clement. I want it in DeKalb for DeKalb principal. So we had workshops for blacks. In other words, as a liaison person, and I was in contact with what was going on. And the language of the street, I just stayed on the ball and I just asked for it. But I got to not, but he never told me no. Mm-hmm. Textbooks. Okay, we were getting hand-me-down textbooks even in Atlanta public schools. I had hand-me-down textbooks. I can see now Grady High School and some of these others now that are extinct that were passed on to us. And I think I told you the joke that Mr. Harper, principal, he was head of the state NAACP. He also was our first executive secretary of the Georgia Teaching and Education Association, and he used to go around the state with Mr. Chair. He never, not Mr. Chair, Mr. He never owned a car. And he said to us, and the first time we met together, I said, maybe I shouldn't say this, and I told him, you know what, black people smarter than they are. I said, you know, y'all would come up here and meet 3 weeks, and they'd run over to Robert Shaw with my principles, you know, they were mine. They gave them to me. I didn't buy them. And I said, you know, they would tell us in 10 or 15 minutes. And I said, we were smarter than y'all. And I said, I tell you another reason we were smart. I said, you know, they gave me old copyright books, and I took the same test when I went to Georgia State and AU that you did, and I qualified on the first test with old books. And I said, now, black people have always been smarter than white people because our children went to school 3 or 4 months out the year, and it took y'all 9 months to learn the same thing. In that conversation. But Mr. Harper did say that to us. He said, there are many white schools just as poor, the buildings, facilities, as we had. So don't feel that we want what they had, we want better. And that's what, as a president of NAACP and as our executive secretary, we fought for equal schools and good schools. And we weren't just fighting for blacks, for school for children. Mm-hmm. I have letters, even for my co-workers, saying the one thing they appreciated about me, I was not drumming for black boys and girls, it was for children. Because when all of us are educated, all of us are happy. Good human and personal relationships. Because you can educate part of the population, need the other part ignorant, that's what was going on. And everybody was so happy it was separate and unequal. This book that this guy put it out just now was writing, he titled it, on my work in the cab, he titled it Separate and Equal. And I laughed. We had a good laugh about it. He just, you know, put a title on it. But see, it was never equal. You didn't have equalization of salaries. You can't be equal when I'm in a shanty and I'm getting books you've already used. It's not equal about that. If it was that good, then why didn't they do it? Why didn't they take the books from our schools? The first series of books, and again, Conference with Mr. Cherry, that we put into our schools was Silver Burdett's social studies, geography books. That was the first series, and then we went to the Macmillan readers, and from that eventually we were getting, you know, brand new books in our schools like everybody. And then of course we went for countywide adoption, so all schools. So these are how things unfurled.
Would you remember when it is you would have first started getting the new books? I'm trying to get some gauge of when you saw progress on some of the issues.
I do not remember, but I have it written somewhere. I could not say the year, but I remember we still had one teacher school, so it had to be in the 40s. Okay. Because we went into our new buildings in 55 or 56, so it had to be in the 40s.
So still in the late 40s? So
yes, I would say late 40s, and that would be correct.
So you saw some progress on some of these issues in the decade of the 1940s?
Oh yes, mm-hmm. Oh yes. It was slow, but most things take time, and it takes patience. And as they say, Rome was not built in one day, but to have any progress at all was better than none. and never did I feel that we weren't doing anything. Just felt whatever we were doing was better than it was the day before.
You mentioned C.L. Harper, and he is such an influential figure.
Oh, right, yes.
And I'm wondering, because we were talking before about the Urban League and how
Mhm.
they did confine their work to the city of Atlanta, but C.L. Harper was working more on a state level. So is it fair to say that the NAACP was more of a presence in DeKalb
No.
than
No. The DeKalb NAACP is recent years.
Mm-hmm.
We
Right.
didn't have a chapter in DeKalb. Let's see, I retired in '83. I have the program, I'm trying to think. Might have been that third, fourth, or fifth annual meeting. No, the NACP unit chapter in DeKalb is very recent. No, there was not a unit in DeKalb.
How did you feel then the influence of what C.L. Harper was doing? Was it more through his work with the Georgia Teachers and
Yes.
Education Association?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. 'Cause
Um,
he touched all teachers in Georgia, not just DeKalb. He was the executive secretary for the Georgia Teachers and Education Association. So he touched them all, not just DeKalb, all of us.
how would you describe the importance of what he did? What was his influence?
He was fearless. He was dynamic. He was reachable. He was concerned. He cared, and was a hard worker. He literally gave his life, just as Mr. Ariel Cousins. Cousins was white. I understand he took all kind of abuse. Why do you care so much about the ends? He did care. And I have often referred to him as my white daddy. I loved him, and I still do. I've had his wife right in this house. When the Gene Supervisors met, I invited her. I had seen her, and I remember when that little girl was born, and at one of our conventions in Albany, Georgia, we presented her some kind of token, and I can remember we gave the little girl a gold locket. She was a little girl at that time. They made an excellent team. Mr. Harper was a leader in his own right. He ran a tight ship for high school. He had what I call club feet. But he could run them 4 floors as good as any good athlete. And you didn't have any policemen on the hall. You didn't have, I don't know, any other school. He selected his staff. And I can look back. I can't think of a teacher I had in high school that wasn't an excellent teacher so far as instruction, and also they modeled, and they were good models for me. And we talk about it. We're now organized in different classes at Washington High, and we meet.
Mm-hmm.
We're meeting this month, class 34. And you just had the highest respect and the highest regard for Mr. Harper. And he was involved in everything that dealt with black people. He was just there. He taught at Morris Brown, which is a private college, but when they made him principal, they couldn't have chosen a better person. I mean, he was intelligent, he was an administrator, he was a leader, and most of all, like I say, he was a Christian gentleman. He was a Christian gentleman. I have never in all the years I have lived heard anybody say anything derogatory about C.L. Harper. It's just one of the things that nearly any black in my age era and back, went to Washington High because it was the only high school we had. Now, there was a private high school over at Atlanta University, Lab High, and then Oglethorpe used to be a private elementary school. It was more or less a demonstration school for the system. But if you lived in Atlanta, you went to Washington High School. See, for David T. was a junior high. This is how I met one of my best friends now. She went to David T. Howard as a junior high, and then, of course, they came to Washington High for their senior year. Yeah, he was a man ahead of his time, like I said about Miss Selena Sloan Butler. They're just people that projected themselves well into the future. And as a result of the legacy they left behind them for us, many of us became what we are because of their leadership. and because of their concern, and they're working with us, not for us, with us. For him to, at the time it was done, this is when salaries were very low. We just started making money in recent years, even all of us. World War II brought that on. People laughed when I said my first 2 years, I made $65 a month, $60 for teaching and $5 supplement for home ec. And you said, what did you buy? Well, a can of milk. Well, I'm with a nickel. I could buy a can of milk. So when you look at, when the economy is down, everything is down. Salaries are down. People don't have jobs. And, of course, you don't pay as much. And we're paying more now. But still, they laugh. Like my daughter, $60, she says, you know. But when she started teaching, she's making much more. But it was no money. I remember one month she gave me her check to put in the bank. Her check was $400.16. That was $100.04 with a AB degree from Stephen College. But she started teaching in the camp. That was no money. If she'd had to pay rent and for a car, I don't know how she would have made it. Mm-hmm. And I told you, I stopped asking new teachers to join the Teacher Association. These gals had to pay for apartments. Many were paying off their college education, and they had to eat. And I was ashamed once I saw my daughter's check. I never asked them to join anything.